this is also one of the most challenging pain point of this industry when it comes to infrastructure readiness. It comes to digital transformation and digital development. Is one of the slowest sector to have progressed. I think e-commerce is going to be one of the key things that is going to drive this sector development. And you've seen a very interesting development over the last few years where there's this messy space now that e-commerce players, airlines, shipping lines, operators, and of course the incumbent logistics service providers that are trying to conquer this space of logistics supply chain. I would say if you were to look ahead and how this will develop, eventually it's actually a game where whoever has the most resources would succeed. Hi, my name is Jeffrey Tan. I have been in the logistic and supply chain industry for the last more than 20 years. I didn't choose to be in this sector, but somehow, coincidentally, I have a chance to join this sector after my graduation. I started my career with the Port of Singapore as is part of its IT and technology division. And that doesn't prevent me from looking back, ever since, and have been moving forward with different parts of the value chain in these sectors. I've been in roles in logistic infrastructure development. I've been in roles in customs and trade compliance. I've been in roles with shipping logistics, third-party logistic companies, supply chain technology companies in the past more than 20 years of my life. And outside of my own career, my interest is really about industry development. So I've been working with many different associations, societies as I've been. Currently, I'm also the president of the Singapore Computer Society Supply Chain Management chapter. So I run a chapter that focuses on adoption of technology in the area of supply chain management. I've been involved in work also in many associations, including Singapore Manufacturing Federation, Singapore Logistics Associations, and many more. So I call myself probably an industry busybody, and I love to be a busybody because I guess that's where you learn. You start to be curious. You start to learn about the developments of the industry. You start to get sensitive about the development of the industry, and then it becomes sort of ingrained and imbued into yourself to keep yourself really relevant in this sector, which I think is very important.
Jeffrey, you are very welcome to the Forward podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Yep, good to be here. Yeah.
Great to have you. Now, to help our listeners get to know you a little bit better, we always have this question at the beginning of all of our episodes. And I'd like to ask you, what moves you forward in both your career and in your life?
For me, I have two parts to that, my career and my life. I think the first part of it was like any typical Singaporean, that graduate from university, and then you look forward to joining a company, uh, work your life, away in that organization and grow a career out of it. And of course, I didn't choose to be where I am in this particular sector, in the logistic and supply chain management sector, but it was by chance that I came to this sector. So the first part of my career was very much focused on my own skill, personal development, career development, where I try to excel in whatever I do. Of course, my first part of that career was very much into technology development in the setting of a supply chain and logistics organization, and that was the thing that kept me going, days and nights into the wee hours of systems implementation and all that. But it took a change in after a decade of my career in that particular sector, in that particular area. I tend to see something very different, that I didn't want to continue the way that I was actually progressing in my own career. I find that it was a very narrow perspective after I came into contact with a greater perspective of things. that I decided that I don't want to be just a corporate, typical corporate person, but I want to be an industry person. I have worked for a decade and I realized that I actually do not know the industry well enough. I do not know people in the industry well enough. I'm not connected to the industry. I'm nobody in the industry, in particular in that particular setting. So I decided took a change in the second part of my career where actually I focus a lot on industry development, and a lot on engaging the industry, networking, finding like-minded people, and I never rested ever since the beginning on that journey. So the you could see that the number of positions that I took on pro bono is quite amazing. But it has been a journey that actually I never looked back, and that resonate with what I feel in life that you are not here to waste your time here on the earth, right? But you should never rest that you're trying to just sail through life without much achievement or perspective or leave anything behind. um, that was actually what was the change between my first decade to the second decade of my career for the past more than 20 years.
Wow. So it sounds like curiosity and seeking to learn and evolve is something that drives you forward both in your career and in your life as well. And it's really refreshing to hear that, halfway through a mark of time, you were like, you know what? This isn't for me. I need to step into something else because I'm not learning. And I don't want to just be another clog in a wheel that continues to rotate without looking outside of yourself, which is really nice to hear. When we look at your experience in the past, then you've had a, a lot of experience around the globe, and I want to look at logistics particularly in terms of, I've seen you speak about some of the common and traditional pain points that you would have seen um, across the years: infrastructure, ports, equipment, and communication. How have you seen these pain points evolve over the years? Have they changed a lot since the COVID-19 pandemic? And particularly when we talk about agility and sustainability.
Hmm. That's a very interesting and I'll say a very relevant question for our industry or for our sector. But having said that, in the first part of that sharing, I didn't choose to be in this sector, and I don't think anybody or any parents who have dreamed that their kids to grow up to be a logistician or be in that sector. I don't think so. I have never met any people that said that I want my kid to grow up to be working in the warehouse or working in the port. That's doesn't happen. But by getting into this industry, you sort of realize that it is something quite unimaginable, or I would say there is something quite noble or very very enriching or very to be in this sector, and you start to realize that this is a sector that actually connects the dots in what we do as part of our daily lives. We just take everything for granted, right? You get your food on the table, you get your things on the supermarket shelves. You order anything, it almost comes like the delivery in the same day. All this doesn't happen by chance, and it's really the hard work of this particular sector, what we call it the logistic and supply chain sector. It is something that people often ignore until the pandemic hits, and people start to realize that, oh, how come I cannot get what I want on the shelves in the supermarket? People start to be snatching up toilet papers. In my 20 years of my industry life, I had never seen so much toilet paper stock up in the warehouse ever in my life. That was something very interesting. When I walked into the warehouse, my automated storage retrieval system was full of toilet papers, basically. And that was the era. It was very interesting. And this is where you actually highlighted the point about this sector issue in terms of infrastructure, connectivity, technology development. If you look at it before the pandemic, even we look before the pandemic, this is one of the oldest industry to be in terms of its history. And this is also one of the most challenging pain point of this industry when it comes to infrastructure readiness. it comes to digital transformation and digital development, is one of the slowest sector to have progressed, unlike the banking finance industry where they have invested a lot into technology and have advanced, and with the fintech and stuff. This is one of the sector that's often trying to catch up, and the pandemic actually sort of brought that to light, where things start to break down. And why is that so? Because while Singapore is a very special, unique place to be in, where the infrastructure developments are of the top notch, world class, and you have digital that is really like we started that journey more than 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where we already started on the digitization journey. But logistics supply chain is never a domestic business. It is a global international business. This is where when other countries digital maturity and infrastructure maturity has not caught up with what the rest of the world developed countries are, and you find that disparity in that context, and this is what it gives way during the pandemic, during the COVID-19, where you see infrastructure not ready. There's not enough warehouses in some countries, not enough cold chain facilities. Some countries are still very much in their paper-based type of processing and documentation. So when the border comes to a close, when connectivity comes to a halt, uh, this is where the entire supply chain actually gave way. And people sort of realized that only during the COVID, or during the pandemic period, and things start to take shape, where there's a lot of digitization effort going into the sector. There's a lot of rush to develop infrastructure. This is what we see in the last 3 years, 4 years of COVID-19. Yeah.
The comment on toilet paper was very good. But in terms of that growth, right, and that move and shift into digitalization and how it's almost, there's a lot of disparity in terms of the rate of growth in certain areas as well. Just last year, Boston Consulting Group reported that 90% of manufacturing companies within the North America region were going to have to relocate within the next 5 years. News reports then, in tandem with that, would show that Southeast Asia will be seen as the new epicenter for manufacturing. What kind of opportunity is presenting itself now for Singapore? You mentioned how Singapore has kind of been ahead of the curve over the last 30 years. So, what does that mean for Singapore?
Okay. Actually, even before the pandemic, we are actually seeing a lot of shifts in the supply chain, where manufacturings are moving out from the manufacturing powerhouse like China into Southeast Asia. And one of the hottest destination was Vietnam and Indonesia and some of this country. This is a I would say the phenomena that we have seen, even it develops, as I said, before the pandemic. And Southeast Asia seems to be one of the hottest spots today for this relocation of manufacturing. But there are several points that I want to highlight, and it's quite important to know. First and foremost, I think from the Singapore perspective, Singapore has um, evolved to be really not the traditional manufacturing industry. But Singapore has remained very focused that manufacturing needs to be definitely more than 20% of its GDP in terms of development. And we actually move from, I would say, lower end manufacturings that are less skill required to more sophisticated, high end manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. And this is a sector that continues to stay strong in Singapore. We have seen some countries that actually lost that focus, and let manufacturing drop to less than 10% of its GDP. And that doesn't really help the country when it comes to crisis situation. Even we see during the pandemic, as one of the key examples, manufacturing remains to be the core, because this is where production happens. You get your supplies, you get your stuff that you really want. But having said that, Singapore is one of the most costly place to be to do manufacturing, and it is definitely not for the typical manufacturing to be hosted in Singapore. But Singapore takes a different position when it comes to this context. The core advanced manufacturing will continue to remain in Singapore and attract um, top tech companies that are into advanced manufacturing, chips manufacturing, to anything to come to relocate to Singapore, as it is one of the most politically stable, more best connected country in terms of transportation and supply chain. And then while it focused on moving manufacturing to some of the special economic zones that it has set up with other countries like Indonesia, with Malaysia coming up, the Johor, Singapore Special Economic Zone, and in China, where he actually has a few of these industry park collaborations that's actually going on. You see in Indonesia, like in Batam, the special economic zone that has been developed for years. This is where what we call the offshore manufacturing, where uh, Singapore companies and um, its partners will be actually manufacturing in these locations. But Singapore remains as a core for its HQ, for its operations. This is what we see. But then when it comes to the rest of the Southeast Asia countries, this is where Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia are developing rapidly, and of course Thailand, in terms of trying to catch this phenomenon in terms of the shift in the supply chain, where a lot of the multinational big corporations are relocating their plants into Southeast Asia. But then one of the key thing that remains, a couple of things that actually remains very challenging for this movement and this relocation is actually first thing connectivity. In terms of connectivity, in terms of transportations, how ready these places are. As you know, not entirely the entire country in Vietnam or in these countries are very developed in terms of transportation connectivity. Singapore is a bit luckier because we are small. We actually developed that years ago, that we are now one of the most connected ports in the world. The other challenge is the labor force, the skill set, the skill level of the labor force. These countries have progressed very much, but yet the labor forces are not to the level of China, where it has grown to very advanced skills, labor force with advanced skill sets. So this is where the next challenge is to really bring up the workforce to the right level, where the more advanced or key high value manufacturing can actually happen in Southeast Asia. And we are seeing this development moving pretty rapidly over the years. Of course, the other thing is really digital in terms of digital maturity. But I guess if I look at it, digital is really the best tool that most country can use to catch up when it comes to digital investment and development. And we have seen that over the last few years, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, there's really huge advancement in digital development.
Brilliant. It's a really exciting time as well. I want to look at policies and how they may impact growth because you've spoken a lot before about how private companies are very entrepreneurial and driven and are able to make an impact without waiting for government policies. So, mentioning Alibaba, JD.com, and more. What lessons can be taken from the success of e commerce and retail, and how can these lessons be used as case studies for other industries that are potentially struggling with the next steps for innovation and maybe halting at policies and not being able to move as quickly?
Okay, I think I would say that from my own personal experience, it's really not um, about whether it's a private company or whether is it a government linked company, or or multinational company. It is whether how the organization culture has been, and whether it actually sort of infuse that entire entrepreneurship spirit in the organization itself. I mean, I work for government-linked companies, multinational companies, and family business. I've seen the different type of culture that each one of it has. I wouldn't say one is better off than the other. There are certain trade-off pros and cons where you could really see the difference. And entrepreneurship is one of the very key thing that I would say that drives the company forward. If there is this strong sense of treating the business like yours, or I will often heard it from my one of my previous mentor, and say that if this is your own money, will you do it this way, or will you have c- conducted the entire process or the investment case the way that you have done it if it's your own money? So this is a very realistic thing. I think today's employees, corporate, people, they probably do not think from that perspective that this is their own money, but it's really the companies, organizations, funds, and resources that they actually are working on. But if they will have to take the perspective that this is your own money, that would you do it this way? Of course, I think the answer would have been very different, coming from my own personal experience. So I would say private companies, they tend to be slightly more entrepreneur because it is very much a survivor. So they tend to be a bit more entrepreneur. They might be sometimes a bit more careful or more conservative in the way that they approach, but they are more agile and slightly a bit more fast moving, less bureaucratic, from that perspective. So some private organizations that are family driven will probably be a single person decision, where they can make decision on the fly without going through the board, without going through a lot of stakeholder management, and this gives a bit of agility. And then that is a pros and cons. As I said, it gives a lot of agility in terms of speed to action, to implement, but then it also lacks a fair bit of more stakeholder considerations to come to a very more accurate decision, I must say. But that's entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneur means you have a bit of entrepreneur gut feel. You try it, you fail fast, and you try to rectify, and then you start to move on. So I would say that, from that perspective, companies need to really have that set of agility and entrepreneurship in their own culture to really move forward, and 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 really leverage on what you mentioned, the policies development, to catch up with the policy development, um, and leverage on those policy development to actually bring your organization to the next level. Yeah.
That's nice as well, and bringing those policies in so that there may be on a individual level, as you mentioned there, part of what you think about in your day to day. Um, and speaking in a broad sense, then, when we look at some of the key challenges that organizations now may encounter when they are trying to integrate new technologies into their operations, how important do you think partnership is for ensuring that project success? And this is speaking broadly across anything.
I think, like I said, one of the key things that we actually often ignore is really about the softer side of things. When it comes to partnership, when it comes to relationship management, um, I think we probably like don't do so well as Singaporean, but we are very focused on our key strengths in terms of technical development, in terms of skill set development. We are very good at that, right? But then one of the key things in all this project management, stakeholder management, is really about the soft skills that we are trying to learn and really catch up. Um, Partnership in terms of any organizations is a very key perspective that it has to be really, really strategically looked into. Whether you're considering, internally in terms of your own stakeholder management when it comes to any big initiative, digital, especially when it comes to digital transformation. You have your key stakeholders from operations, from finance, from marketing, from business development, besides the IT, which is like probably the technical division or department of the organization. Oftentimes, we've seen a lot of mistakes made by organization when it comes to such internal projects. Is they try to put IT or the tech people in driving those initiatives. Um, it's not exactly the best idea because unless this tech person is very business driven, he probably is in a position, like I said, very, very well skilled technically, but probably couldn't do a lot of their business communications and stakeholder management. So the I seen organizations that have make that mistake by placing the program project manager or the portfolio manager as a tech or IT guy, but oftentimes the right person to do it is actually the business people. And this is where if you see my career, I actually transit more from a tech person to really more of the business side, and that was actually my own aspiration. So because I believe that uh, everything is revolving around the business, right? So the business drive things forwards. It brings along the tech, it brings along the IT, it brings along the finance, it brings along the marketing, and this will be the key champion or the key driver in that organization to drive things forward. When it comes to the bigger perspective of thing, where you are involved in very strategic projects, externally, globally, partnership with other organizations, when it comes to joint venture, and all that, that is another entirely different stakeholder management perspective. I must say that most people have limited exposure when it comes to such external partnership development. It is something that is different from the internal part. When you look at external partnership with organization, be it joint venture, be it some form of strategic partnership, um, the person that is orchestrating this has to have that strategic vision perspective in mind in order for him to drive the projects forwards. I'm fortunate that I've been in such positions and shoes before where besides looking at um, the two organizations that need to come together in this partnership in terms of the balancing the interests, the managing the conflicts, to then alignment with the greater perspective of how the industry is actually developing, how policies are being supported, to then the government initiative, alignment with the government initiatives and directions, is a whole new game, right? So it is something that I think it requires a very strategic vision, a very strategic mindset. At the same time, very, very sensitive and careful when it comes to that relationship management. So such individual hard to come by,
Yeah, I was
but
just thinking
these are
that.
people that we've seen in organizations that have been very successful when it comes
Yeah,
to such ecosystem and ecosystem partnership. Yeah.
it just sounds like these kind of people are unicorns or something, like very hard to come across. And so looking at the future, and we're going to talk a bit more about the future, but looking at that, would you say the best placement for partnerships and driving innovation forward would be building almost hybrid functioning teams? You know, having IT tech work together with marketing and each of them to have some sort of literacy between them in each area so that they can almost combine and be able to have that literacy from each side of their perspectives. How would you see that? Yeah. Is that what you?
Yeah, I think if I have um with this experience that I have carried forward with me in the past 2 decades, I
Mm,
think today we are in a different situation when it comes to driving such initiatives. Of course, the idea of a matrix organization versus a typical hierarchical organization has always been there. But then I think, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of agility and
mm,
entrepreneurship, right? I have seen, examine some of the companies that are successful in implementing these two key features in the organizations. One of it is one of home appliance company that actually start to have this concept of small little teams and initiative that they put together and
mm,
budget being allocated. So, for example, one of the employees raised their hands and said, "Hey, I'm going to drive this thing. I have this bright idea," and he submitted this to the boss, to the organization, and said that I want to drive this. Immediately after validation, a small team that he needs is put together.
mm,
Budget is being allocated, and you start to drive this initiative forward. He pulls together, like what you say, the IT, the marketing people, whatever the resources that you need, and budget is being allocated for him to drive this initiative forward. Months later, we probably there's probably a stock take that whether this is moving successful, and then if it's more resources, more
mm,
budget will be allocated. If it's not successful, it is a try and fail fast kind of a thing, right? And then we just move on to something else. And I think this is something that probably in the next in the coming years, this is how organizations should take things forward, to have that agility and the entrepreneurship spirit built into it by setting up such small little teams, putting together such small little teams to drive initiatives forward. And I
mm.
believe that's more effective than having a big initiative and try to get all resources alignment, spend numerous amount of time planning before even the development starts, right? And all that time and effort is
Six,
wasted. The
yeah.
time to market is lost, right? Opportunity cost is lost because
Mm,
of this. So I think that should be the new norm or the new way of working moving forward to really help organizations to progress. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just even thinking of those big hefty projects and the 60,000 emails within one thread to try get something off the ground and the 70,000 meetings and everything. So those smaller teams working together to kind of fasten that process and having those small circles of innovation and entrepreneurship within an organization would be an ideal way to move forward. And that's probably going to, you know, have a lot of challenges for organizations in themselves in terms of shedding their status quo and the old ways of doing things, but it is quite interesting and hopefully we'll see more of that as we move forward. I want to look at some emerging trends that you're keeping a close eye on for the future. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. I guess from the logistic and supply chain perspective, as I said, it has been always one of the slower moving sectors to adopt technology. Of course, I can't say it's across the entire thing, but a majority of that is really companies that would not have the resources to do so. But of course, in terms of use cases, in terms of business use cases for such technology adoption, we have seen this sector actually there's a strong uptick. Initially, I guess everybody was very hype about blockchain, right? So blockchain was one of the key thing that was driving a lot of the movement, developments, and initiative in this sector. Well, I guess over the last few years, it sort of has not really taken off. We've seen many companies have gone into it, and they retreat from the blockchain perspective. Um, I think one of the key lessons learned from that is actually being able to have an eye on how this technology will affect your industry. That's one. The second thing is whether is it implementable? Is it something that you have a use case that is easily adopted? The case of the blockchain, that is a use case. But
Mm,
what is actually missing is that this use case is really beyond what is actually implementable. Why do I say that? Is because we mentioned earlier that this is a global business. It's not a domestic business, right? So it's not
mm,
something that you kept within the in country and you could implement it and everybody start to adopt it and you can see the effect, coming. Especially blockchain. In the case of blockchain and the use case, it is a global business, an international business. So you're trying to get everyone in the world to align, that is doing this business to align and start to use this technology. And there's issues like the digital maturity level of the countries, that is able to adopt this technology. That is stakeholder relationship management issues. There's politics issues. There is
mm.
many issues, right? You want to get all the customs to work together. You want to get all the banks to work together. You want to get all the shipping lines to work together. Wow, that takes like Superman and probably like something even I don't think even Donald Trump could do it, right? So it is something that is impossible to do. But then there are technologies that probably are more implementable. We have seen adoption of data analytics
Mm,
in our sector that has given a lot of benefits from optimizations to insights and all that. And then now it progressed to one of the hottest topic, which is AI, right? Apple just
yeah,
has it's launched yesterday, in terms of their latest development in AI and stuff. I think AI is another hype that's going on right now
yeah,
with generative AI and all the developments of the large language models. But I would say the adoption use cases are still a very minimum in terms of the development that we've seen so far. Yeah, it's a
mm,
great tool, right? I mean, it helps you to do all your research, your chatbots and stuff and all
mm,
that. Then it goes in a bit of that trying to do that demand forecasting and stuff. But it's still slow in terms of that development, in terms of adoption. But
mm.
it is something, I guess, is if we compare to blockchain, more implementable. And
Yes,
we already had successful use cases uh, going on in the industry. I believe you will probably also know, or you probably will have already caught that, is that we use robotics in our
yeah,
business, right? In the warehouse, where we talk about e-commerce, Alibaba, and all this, AMRs and stuff. there is really inbuilt artificial intelligence in those robots to a certain extent that's able to do your planning and your orchestration and all that. So it's not something brand new to us, but
Mm,
it is something that we've seen, that has been developing. And I believe we didn't really touch on the e-commerce part. I think e-commerce is going to be one of the key thing that is going to drive this sector development.
mm,
With the development of what we call the new retail. Rather, I would say the new retail rather than e-commerce. E-commerce is part of the new retail, right? So instead of buying from the stores, we are now buy from online, and then we now buy from watching a video, right? And
mm,
then we now probably next time we buy from doing something else like in metaverse or whatever, right? So this is going to change the entire new retail model that drives back to our sector is actually supporting in terms of the entire orchestration and movement of goods, delivery, and everything. This is where we've seen that there's going to be a huge change when it comes to the
mm.
new retail. The sector is getting ready for it by putting more automations, more optimization capability into the sector. But what remains challenging is still the infrastructure in
Yeah,
terms of connectivity and infrastructure in terms of transportation infrastructure is still limiting in certain places, but it's moving, it's developing. It's just that how long it takes to move on, moving forward. So this is where we've seen in terms of this sector how it's really moving a lot. In fact, if you look at it, it's a very interesting trend. Um, E-commerce company like JD, Alibaba, has been always trying to build its own logistics and supply chain capability,
I
right?
wanted to ask about this.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
that is what they have been doing, and then they sort of create a business out of it with Cainiao and JD Logistics, and then they probably could even lease the entity, right? But
yes,
they extend themselves beyond what they are supporting their parent organizations in terms of e-commerce, but also move towards logistics development, B2B to B2C now, to
mm,
B2B, to support customers that needs logistics. Cainiao and even JD has gone into logistic infrastructure development. They have started to build warehouse under their property arm, uh, um, depots and everything to really run their logistic operations. On
yeah,
the other hand, the logistic community is fighting back. There are logistic companies that have gone into e-commerce, right? So they have been doing fulfillment and logistic, but then they started their own e-commerce enabler arm that actually helps the customer now to sell their products through platforms, including their own platforms, but that's not their main focus. They are not there to build a marketplace, but they
mm,
also tap on platforms like Shopee, Lazada, Alibaba, Amazon to help to push the customer products, which they actually are actually running their operations. They are doing their fulfillment and their logistics, but move those products to those marketplaces and start to sell, and in the end fulfill those logistic requirements on the back end. And then you can see other players that are actually jumping into this sector, from the airlines like AirAsia
mm.
starting teleport, to the ports like PSA going into logistics, DP World going to logistics,
Yes.
to shipping lines acquiring logistic companies and going into logistics. It becomes a very whole crowded environment right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to touch on because it seems like quite a messy space. Because when you speak about new retail, is the infrastructure keeping up with the how fast new retail is moving? And if that supply chain and the logistics companies now can't keep up with that, they're going to find a new way and their own way to be able to produce and send out and ship faster. And then you have a whole other side of startups and everyday consumers just setting up their own shops and selling. And where will they go? Will they go to these established companies and start working with them, or and it just seems like everyone's fighting their own corner, and it's all a race against time and getting something out as quickly as possible and not waiting around.
Yep, exactly. So if that's why I was saying that this sector is very interesting if you follow through the development, because people from outside of this sector, they probably would not have that insight on how this thing is actually developing. But when, as an industry person, you get to get in touch with this all this development, and you've seen a very interesting development over the last few years where there's this messy space now that e-commerce players, airlines, shipping lines, port operators, and of course the incumbent logistics service providers that are trying to conquer this space of logistics supply chain fulfillment plus e-commerce, in general as part of this entire model. I would say if you were to look ahead on how this will develop, eventually it's actually a game where whoever has the most resources would
Mm,
succeed.
mm,
And you can see the successful case of the Alibabas
yeah.
and the JDs. They are, as we mentioned earlier, they are private companies. They are very entrepreneurship. They find ways and means to get their thing done, right? When the e-commerce company when an e-commerce company goes into Indonesia, they practically can't use any of the route optimization or the delivery proof of delivery kind of capability because the addresses are like it could be in a village or some places
Yeah.
where you don't have a proper address. So they built their own proof of delivery and route optimization engine, building on their experience on the ground, and came up with that, right? So this is something quite interesting. I would say that resources is going to be the determining factor for the players that's going to come out from this messy game that is actually
Mm,
going on right now. The second thing is whoever has that strategic perspective of things and be able to implement that with a very good methodology will actually
mm,
change the game, right? I mean, you could have the greatest vision, but you couldn't implement it.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
not going to work, right? And we've seen some of the failing cases now in the sector. I can't mention names, but you can see some of the failing cases now. But yet the other thing to take note is really your business model. Whether you have a very clear business model in mind.
Mm,
One of the things that makes um, some of these unicorns or these players in our industry is really not about the technology. You could be very amazed by the AMRs, the robots, the
mm,
technology that all these company have, but the key thing behind it is actually the business model. How they
interesting.
actually conduct their business, how they charge the consumer,
Mm,
where do they find their revenue. If we are still running this industry by the traditional way that we are charging customers, we are making revenue, making money from the service fee that we earn, and then we have the vendors that we are working with to take care of, and we're earning that narrow margin between us and the customer, and this continues to be the model today, I must say.
mm,
But if we are only leveraging on that as our only source of revenue and our only channel of making money,
yeah.
I don't think that's going to take the organizations forward. Yeah.
Wow. And okay, I want to just hold on to that because this is a feature that we bring into each episode and it's bring forward, leave behind in line with the podcast title and the name. So, what are three things to wrap up that? What are three things global logistic leaders should bring forward in order to stay resilient for the future? And what are three things, and I'm going to just go with CEOs in general, what are three things that they should leave behind in order to move forward?
Well, I think one of the few things that I mentioned in some of my conversation with industry leaders is um, it is now a very different era as we have been, right,
Yeah.
compared to years ago. Today's leaders, global leaders in this space, and the CEOs in this space, they definitely need to arm themselves with a very strategic vision that they have. They need to know basically um, politics to industry development, and all these things should be constantly in their head as they try to
Mm,
drive the organization forward. So the entire strategic vision and alignment is going to be very key. If you're just a typical P&L person trying to run an organization, well, you probably could survive, but I guess it doesn't really move the organization forward.
mm,
And then looking downwards, right? I mean, looking below, what this global leaders and CEO needs is really few key skills and few key perspective. One is, of course, the digital mindset. Today's organization is no longer just a traditional brick and mortar organization. Digital is going to change everything, right? We have one
Mm.
of the banks in Singapore saying that they no longer is a bank; they are already a technology company, right? So
Yeah.
this is things that's going to change the industry. Digital internally within organizations, innovations need to take place, right? You need to set up, like what I say, small little teams that drive some of the key initiatives and innovations development. And then on the other hand, one of the key things on their mind, of course, in today's context is really sustainability. So they
Yeah.
need to have the entire ESG perspective in what they actually do and execute. Of course, having green and sustainability as one of the key topics. This is one of the sector that often has been highlighted for green and sustainability initiative, and of course, the very strong carbon emission that's coming from this sector. Of course, we are not the biggest one in terms of contribution, but yet it's something that is on the highlight.
Mm.
Um, the fourth thing is really about connectivity. So you need to be able to drive connectivity as part of your business moving forward. Infrastructure, transportation, network arrangement, and then the digital connectivity part of it is to be all in your head to really put those
Mm.
things together. So DISC, as I mentioned, is one of the key things that I think organizations need to have. Below the entire supporting structure is really about agile, agility, and entrepreneurship that needs to really happen and take place. I look at this as a framework that
Mm.
actually every leaders or every CEO should have to bring the organization forward. What they should leave behind, I think they should leave behind what they have learned over the last few years in terms of um, how they deal with people, right? Because the new generation is going to be very different, right?
Yeah.
They don't really take what we took, in our career. They don't really uh, bother what we used to bother in what we, in our years, but they have a different entire perspective. They
Yeah.
need to be able to connect and relate to the newer generations. This is what they should leave behind, the old way, the old learning, what I call the learn, unlearn, and relearn kind of a thing.
Yeah.
They should also leave behind the old business model that they're very familiar with, and try to move forward with new business model, and that requires entire change, in the company, in the industry, and they probably want to be part of it. This is
Mm.
something that I feel that these are the two key things that they probably should leave behind, and try to not to take it forward as they develop the industry, they develop the organization. Yeah.
They're brilliant points. Brilliant, brilliant points. And I know I'm conscious of time, so I want to ask you just one final question, if that is okay. What is one piece of advice that you would give to your future self?
Yeah, that's a very good one. I actually this is a question that I actually have pondered. I would say in the last few years. As I mentioned, the first part of my career, the first decade was really about driving myself forward. Climbing the corporate ladder. The second
Mm.
part was really about industry development. Then when I start to do a reflection in the last couple of years, right, I actually sort of uh, broke my entire life into every 25 years, right? So the first 25 years of my time was really a, teenage development, learning, and probably a bit of that career. The last coming to 25 years was about growing my career, developing myself as an industry person, and then what I'm going to probably struggle now is what's going to be my next 25 years, right, when I hit 75. What is going to happen in this next 25 years that I need to plan for? If I'm fortunate, I'll have another last 25 years of enjoying a retirement, but
Mm.
that probably is something I couldn't predict. But at least when I look at it now, from now to the future, what should I be reminding myself of, or give myself advice of, as you asked that question?
Mm.
I think it's always continue to have that curiosity. I think this is also a famous thing by Steve Jobs, right? Is that it's always that curiosity. So the curiosity to learn, to know about the industry, to know about things develop. You can't stop. Once you stop, you're probably like out of touch, and probably like not relevant anymore. So this thing
Mm.
has to be carried on. The other thing is really to continue to be having that agility mindset and try not to be bounded or restricted by your old ways of doing things, or your old knowledge, but be embracing new knowledge. What I
Mm.
seen, or what I sort of experienced myself, I seen leaders now in the leadership position of the organizations are continuing their old ways of doing things. They are very comfortable with their old way of doing things. They are not trying to change, because this is how they have conducted business for the last 40 years or more, right? And they are really into it. They think this is the best way of doing it. But yet they have really fallen behind. When I look at it, they have really fallen behind to really catch up with time and development. So
Mm.
I wanted to remind my future self that I do not want to fall into that paradigm. I
Yes.
don't want to be having that enclosed mindset when somebody from the next generation come to me and say, "Hey, I have this bright idea, and it works, it will change the industry." And I'll say, "No, this is not the way. We have been doing this for the last 40 years, and
Yes.
this doesn't work. No, this is not going to be me. I don't want to be like that. To be seen like that, or by someone that has seen in this sector that have behaved like that. I don't want to be like that. So it is really about keeping that open mind, to
Yes.
be able to continue to able to receive new inputs, new ideas, so that I would myself also continue to become relevant, right? So
Yes.
so so this is what I want to give that advice to my future self, which I think that will be the most common blind spot that anyone will have as you age. And
Yeah.
we have to realize this: as you age, you tend to be more comfortable with your old ways of doing things. It's something you couldn't run away, but you have to constantly remind yourself that you can't fall into that paradigm. Yeah.
That is so refreshing to hear and very important to say at this time in our lives as well. So thank you so much, Jeffrey. I think that is a wonderful way to end this conversation here. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and I look forward to seeing your future self.
Thank you for having me. It's a great conversation. Thank you.